The showroom smelled like money and desperation. August 1967, southern Kansas, drought summer, and Tom Brennan was about to make a decision that would either save his life or destroy it. He didn't know which yet. Nobody did. Tom's boots hit that polished dealership floor, and Vernon Hastings, slicked back hair, tie clip gleaming even in 100-degree heat, took one look and made his judgment. This farmer wasn't worth his Saturday morning. Tom was 32, hands like cracked leather, farming 420 acres his grandfather broke with mules in 1909. He ran a 1949 Farmall M tractor. Paint faded to pink. Engine so old the serial number had worn smooth. And he was about to walk into a humiliation that would echo for 20 years. Vernon finally wandered over, hands in pockets, smile cold as January. "Help you with something?" Tom nodded at the new John Deere 4020 sitting there like a green and yellow god. "What are you asking?" "Serious machine," Vernon said. 95 horsepower, power steering, 8-speed transmission. That's the future right there. $4,800. Might find some room for a serious buyer. The math didn't work. Tom knew it before he asked, but he asked anyway. "What would you give me on trade for my Farmall?" Vernon's expression changed. Got harder. "Which Farmall?" 49M runs good. New clutch last spring. Vernon actually laughed. Short, sharp, like a knife. "A 49M? Hell, friend, that thing's old enough to vote. I couldn't give you more than $200 for it. And that's charity. I'd probably just scrap it for parts." The showroom went silent. Two other men browsing stopped to listen. Tom could feel their eyes. Could feel the judgment crawling across his skin. But here's what nobody knew yet. Tom was about to do something that would prove every single one of them wrong. $200, Tom said slowly. Not a question. Just letting that number hang there like a noose. "Nobody wants those old M's anymore," Vernon said, playing to his audience now. "They're slow. They're small. They're obsolete. You're probably burning more in repairs every year than that tractor's worth." He leaned against the 4020's tire, getting comfortable. "Smart farmers are upgrading, getting equipment that can cover ground, make them profitable. Guys still running that old Farmall International junk?" He shrugged. "Well, that's why half the small operators are selling out." Tom felt heat rise in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "That tractor's pulled every pound of wheat I've grown for 14 years. "And that's exactly my point," Vernon said. "You're working twice as hard to grow half as much. This machine here? You could cut your field time in half, pull a bigger plow, cover more acres. That's how the successful operations are doing it now." He spread his hands. "But hey, if you want to keep nursing that old relic along, that's your business. Just don't come crying when you can't compete anymore." One of the other men actually chuckled. Tom stood there another moment, looking at the 4020, doing the math one more time even though he knew it wouldn't change. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked out into the August heat without another word. The drive back felt longer than 17 miles. "Now, before we go further, I want to know what you're thinking right now. Would you have bitten your tongue like Tom did, or would you have said something back? Because what Tom did next was about to shock everyone in Callahan County." Ellen met him at the kitchen door. She'd been a farm wife for 9 years, and she could read drought in the sky and disappointment in her husband's shoulders. She had her own opinions about new tractors and debt. "They wouldn't work with you," she said, pouring coffee even though the house was already hot as a kiln. "Offered me $200 for the M," Tom said. "Said it's obsolete. Said smart farmers are upgrading." Ellen set the coffee down harder than necessary. $200 for a tractor that works every day. Called it charity. Said I'm working twice as hard to grow half as much. "Smart farmers are also selling out," Ellen said quietly. "Meridian Bank foreclosed on the Hendricks place last month. Bill Morehouse lost his farm in July. Both of them bought new equipment 3 years ago. Both of them got buried when wheat prices dropped. Tom wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. Vernon Hastings basically called me a fool in front of half the county. Ellen sat down across from him, reached across the table, took his hand. Then we keep the Farmall, she said, and Vernon Hastings can go straight to hell. Tom looked up at her, saw the steel in her eyes that had made him ask her to marry him in the first place, and he felt something settle in his chest, felt a decision click into place like a plow dropping into soil. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I think that's exactly what we do. But keeping the Farmall meant Tom had to become a different kind of farmer. He spent his evenings with manuals spread across the kitchen table, teaching himself diesel engine theory and hydraulic systems from books he borrowed from the county library. He learned to weld, practicing on scrap metal until he could lay a bead straight and strong enough to hold under load. He started scrounging salvage yards for parts, building a collection in his barn that other farmers called junk. But Tom knew it was gold if you understood what you were looking at. The Farmall M became more than a tractor, it became a statement. Proof of something he couldn't quite put into words, but felt deep in his bones. Something about self-reliance and independence, and not letting other men's opinions dictate how he ran his operation. Word got around the way it does in small farming communities. Tom Brennan's the guy still running that old Farmall, still doing things the hard way, still refusing to modernize. Some men respected it, most didn't. Vernon Hastings made sure the story spread, told it like a joke at coffee shops and gas stations, about the stubborn fool who'd rather nurse an obsolete machine than step into the 20th century. About the farmer who was going to work himself to death trying to compete with 19-year-old equipment. It got laughs, it got nods, it became the kind of story people told to make themselves feel smarter. And the years rolled on. 1968 brought rain, blessed rain that turned the winter wheat green as money. Tom's crop came in strong. He paid down his land note, put money in savings, fixed the roof on the barn. The Farmall pulled the grain drill, pulled the combine, pulled wagon after wagon of wheat to the elevator, never complaining, always starting, always working. 1969 was harder. Late freeze killed the early wheat. Then grasshoppers came in clouds thick enough to darken the sun. Tom replanted late, made enough to break even. He rebuilt the Farmall's transmission that winter, working in a barn with a space heater and frozen fingers, learning as he went. Refusing to pay a mechanic for work he could figure out himself. 1970 brought drought again, the kind that cracked the earth and turned the sky pale and angry. But Tom had learned from the last drought. He'd changed his tilling methods, started leaving stubble to hold moisture. His yields weren't great, but they were better than his neighbors. At the implement dealership, Vernon Hastings sold John Deere after John Deere. He sold them to young farmers who thought new equipment was the key to success. He sold them to established operators who believed bigger was always better. He sold them on credit terms that seemed reasonable until wheat prices fell, or rain didn't come, or unexpected repairs ate up the margins. And every time he passed Tom in town, he'd smile that same smile. The one that said he knew something Tom didn't. By 1971, 3 farms around Meridian had gone under. By 1972, it was 7. Good men, hard workers, guys who'd done everything the experts said to do, bought the right equipment, expanded their operations, modernized their farming practices. But when the note came due and the bank wanted its money, all that modern equipment got auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. The families packed up and moved to town or moved away entirely, leaving empty houses and silent barns and fields that got absorbed by bigger operations. Tom kept farming his 420 acres, kept maintaining his Farmall M, kept doing things the way he'd learned to do them with his hands and his back and his stubborn refusal to quit. If you're enjoying this story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. 1973 brought changes nobody saw coming. The Arab oil embargo hit that October, and diesel prices jumped so fast it made farmers' heads spin. Suddenly, those big new tractors with the powerful engines were burning fuel that cost twice, then 3 times, what it had cost a year before. Farmers who'd planned their budgets around cheap diesel were scrambling. Tom's Farmall M, with its smaller engine and simpler design, sipped fuel compared to the newer machines. What had seemed like a disadvantage, that lower horsepower, that slower operating speed, suddenly became an asset when every gallon cost real money. He could still plow his acres, still pull his equipment, still get his work done, and he was spending a third what his neighbors were spending on diesel. That winter, a farmer named Ray Thornton stopped by Tom's place one Saturday morning. Ray drove a new GMC pickup and farmed with a 4430 John Deere he'd bought in '71. He and Tom had never been particularly close. Ray had been one of the men in the implement dealership that day in '67, one of the ones who'd heard Vernon Hastings call Tom a fool. Tom was in the barn working on the Farmall's brakes when Ray pulled up. He came out wiping grease off his hands. Waited while Ray got out of the truck and stood there looking uncomfortable. "Help you with something, Ray?" Ray cleared his throat. "I'm going to sell out. Told my wife this morning. Can't make the numbers work anymore. Equipment payments, land payments, fuel costs. Everything just piled up too high." Tom didn't say anything, just waited. "Thing is," Ray continued, "I remember what Vernon Hastings said to you that day. Remember you walking out of there. Most of us thought you were done for. Thought you'd be selling inside 2 years. He looked at the barn, at the Farmall visible through the open door, at the farm that was still operating while his was about to end. "Guess you were the smart one after all." Tom shifted his weight. "I'm sorry about your place, Ray. That's hard." "Yeah." Ray kicked at a dirt clod. "I just wanted to say, I was wrong about you. A lot of us were." After Ray left, Tom went back to working on the brakes, but his hands were shaking slightly, and it wasn't from the cold. 1974, 1975, 1976. The years kept turning. Fuel prices stayed high. Wheat prices bounced around. Tom kept farming. The Farmall passed 3,000 hours, then 4,000, then 5,000. Tom rebuilt the engine in the winter of '76, bored the cylinders, installed new pistons and rings, timing gears, bearings, gaskets. Everything that moved or sealed or wore. He did it himself over 3 months, learning from manuals and trial and error, taking photographs as he disassembled so he'd remember how everything went back together. When he fired it up that spring, the engine ran smoother than it had in 20 years, purred like it was grateful for the attention. And Tom stood there in the barn, listening to it idle, and felt something close to love for that machine. Felt connected to it in a way he couldn't quite explain to anyone who hadn't spent 1,000 hours keeping something alive through knowledge and sweat. More farms sold, more families left. The Mercantile in Meridian closed in '75. The grain elevator consolidated with 1-2 counties over in '76. The county fair that had run every September since 1907 got canceled in '77 for lack of participation. The community was shrinking, drying up, blowing away like topsoil in a dust storm. But Tom's farm endured. By 1977, 10 years after Vernon Hastings had called him a fool and offered him $200 for his obsolete tractor, Tom Brennan owned his land outright. Every acre paid for, every note cleared. He'd made the final payment to Meridian Bank in July. The county clerk filed the satisfaction of mortgage on July 22nd, and that piece of paper meant more to Tom than any trophy or award could have meant. He was 42 years old. His Farmall was 28. They were both still working. Ellen threw him a small party, just a few close friends and neighbors who'd also survived the decade. People who understood what it meant to still be farming when so many others had given up or been forced out. They grilled steaks in the yard, drank beer in the evening coolness, told stories about close calls and narrow escapes and the times they'd thought for sure they wouldn't make it. Someone asked Tom what his secret was, how he'd managed to hold on when bigger operations with better equipment had folded. Tom thought about it for a while, watching the sun go down over his wheat fields, watching the light turn everything gold and amber and purple. "I think maybe I just didn't try to be something I wasn't," he said finally. "Didn't try to outproduce the big operators. Didn't try to compete on their terms. Just tried to run a farm I could afford, with equipment I could fix, growing crops I understood, living on less than I made." He paused. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, just sustainable and stubborn. "Don't forget stubborn," Ellen added, smiling at him from across the yard. "Yeah," Tom agreed. "That too. Now I want to hear from you folks watching this. Would you have had the discipline Tom had? To keep running old equipment when everyone around you is upgrading? Could you have handled being called obsolete and foolish year after year? Leave me a comment with your thoughts. Because this kind of pressure to modernize or die, that's something every generation faces in different ways. And what happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The day Vernon Hastings' dealership closed came in September of 1977. Tom heard about it at the feed store before he saw the signs on the door. The implement business had gotten too tight, too competitive, margins too thin. Vernon had been selling tractors on credit terms he couldn't sustain, taking trade-ins for more than they were worth, trying to maintain volume in a market that was shrinking. The bank called his notes. The manufacturer pulled his franchise. The whole operation went under in less than a month. Tom drove into Callahan one Friday afternoon and pulled up in front of the shuttered dealership. The showroom windows were empty. The lot where the shiny new John Deeres had sat was bare concrete. There was a bankruptcy sale notice taped to the front door. He sat in his truck for a few minutes, looking at it, trying to figure out how he felt. He didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel vindicated. Mostly, he felt sad. Felt like he was looking at one more piece of the rural world he'd grown up in crumbling away. One more part of the community infrastructure that had supported farmers for decades, just gone. But he also felt something else, something harder and clearer. He'd been proven right about something important, something that went deeper than tractors or business practices. He'd been proven right about the value of self-reliance, about the danger of debt, about the difference between what you need and what someone's trying to sell you. A car pulled up beside him. He looked over to see Vernon Hastings himself behind the wheel. A Cadillac that probably should have been repossessed already. Vernon looked at Tom. For a moment their eyes met through two sets of car windows, and Tom saw something in Vernon's face he'd never seen before. Saw defeat and humiliation, and a particular kind of shame that comes from being loudly wrong about something you were loudly right about. Tom nodded once, respectful, acknowledging the man, if not the choices he'd made. Vernon nodded back, then drove away. Tom never saw him again. Word was he moved to Wichita, got a job selling insurance, never came back to Callahan County. The years after that were steadier. Tom had learned what worked and what didn't, had developed a system that fit his land and his equipment and his temperament. He didn't get rich, didn't expand much beyond his original 420 acres, but he made a living, raised 2 kids who both went to college, kept his marriage strong, stayed in his community, and farmed the land his grandfather had broken with mules back when the century was new. The Farmall M kept working. Tom rebuilt the transmission again in '81, replaced the radiator in '83, put in a new clutch in '86. Each time he did the work himself, had developed enough skill and knowledge that he could diagnose problems by sound, could feel through the steering wheel when something wasn't quite right, could keep that machine running long past when any reasonable person would have said it should have been retired. Other farmers started asking him for help. Young guys who'd bought used equipment cheap and couldn't afford mechanic rates. Older men who'd grown up working on their own machines but had forgotten skills they hadn't used in years. Tom developed a reputation as someone who could fix damn near anything, who understood the old equipment, who had parts stashed away and knowledge stored up and patience enough to figure out problems that would have made other men quit. He never charged much for his help. Sometimes just asked for parts cost. sometimes just accepted a six-pack or a helping hand when he needed it. It wasn't about money. It was about something else, about maintaining knowledge, about preserving the kind of self-sufficiency that he'd learned was the difference between surviving and going under. By the mid-'80s, Tom's operation had become something of an anomaly, a working museum, a farm that ran on principles most people thought had died with the Great Depression. But it worked. Year after year, season after season, it worked. And then on an evening in August of 1987, 20 years almost to the day after Tom had walked out of Vernon Hastings's showroom, everything came full circle. Tom was finishing up his second cutting of alfalfa. Maybe an hour of daylight left when he saw the truck coming down his road. A new Ford F-250 moving fast, dust trailing behind it like a brown ribbon. It pulled up to the barn and a man got out. Mid-30s, clean clothes, expensive boots. Tom didn't recognize him. "You Tom Brennan?" the man called out. "I am." The man walked over, extended his hand. "Name's Michael Hastings. Vernon Hastings was my father." Tom shook his hand, felt the pieces clicking together. "I know who your father was," Tom said carefully. Michael nodded. "I figured. Dad passed away last month. Heart attack. I've been going through his things, and I found something I thought you should see." He walked back to his truck, pulled out a folder, brought it over. Inside was a photocopy of a ledger. Dated entries from 1967 through 1977. Names of customers, tractors sold, payment schedules, and beside each name, a handwritten note about status. Tom scanned the list, saw names he recognized, farms that had sold, operations that had gone under, families that had left. At the bottom of the last page, in Vernon Hastings' handwriting, was a single sentence. Tom Brennan was right and I was wrong. He understood what mattered, and I sold people what I wanted them to buy, not what they needed. That's on me. Tom read it twice, looked up at Michael. "He wrote that about 6 months before the dealership closed," Michael said. "Never showed it to anyone, never apologized, but he knew. He knew he'd steered good people wrong, knew he'd valued profit over their survival." Michael paused. "I'm not asking you to forgive him. I just thought you should know that he figured it out eventually, that he understood what you understood. Just too late to do anything about it." Tom folded the paper carefully, handed it back. "Appreciate you bringing this by," he said. "That took character." "Dad made a lot of mistakes," Michael said, "but he taught me one thing worth knowing. He taught me what not to do." They stood there for a moment in the evening light, two men connected by history and choices and the long shadow of consequence. Then Michael got back in his truck and drove away. Tom walked back to the barn where the Farmall M sat waiting. Red paint faded and worn, but engine ready. Always ready. He climbed up into the seat, sat there for a minute, hands on the wheel, thinking about 20 years, and all the farms that had come and gone, and all the men who'd made different choices. Then he turned the key. The engine fired up smooth and strong, just like it always did. And Tom Brennan went back to work. Now, if you appreciated this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove everyone wrong? Have you ever held on to something everyone said was worthless and had it save you in the end? Let me know, and stick around, because we've got more stories from the heartland coming your way. Stories about the people who built this country 1 acre at a time. Stories about the ones who understood that sometimes the old ways aren't old, they're just wiser than we've been taught to believe.